So, first solo episode, I wanted to explain what these would be. Now, guys, I read a lot, and I'm not saying that to be, some big brain jerk. I figured in the spirit of the original idea of this podcast, I'll take something that I read and turn it into a little bit of like short form, chewable knowledge podcast that you can take with you into the week, to maybe reflect on or think about, or just something that you find that, oh, guess I'm a little smarter now. But today I wanted to introduce two stoic concepts, and you'll hear me bring up the philosophy quite a bit because it's really changed how I perceive my life, and as somebody who's kind of fallen away from religion, this is a good practical filler for something like that, right? But I wanted to look at these two ideas in a bit of a vacuum, right? Now, I have to explain a little bit about Stoic philosophy as we go into this, so I'm going to give a really reductive example, but it goes without saying to just read the great masters, but in Stoic philosophy, you have control over you, your mind, and that goodness resides within you and what you do and all that. You have control over you, and thus you're the master of your domain, but you're not the master of others' domains, right? Things happen, and they happen outside of you, but you don't have control over the things that happen, outside of you. For example, you can choose to be annoyed that it's raining, or you can choose not to be annoyed, right? Now, a Stoic would say there's no reason for you to be annoyed about the rain because the rain was out of your control. You have no control over the weather, so why are you becoming angry about it? It shouldn't bother you. Basically, we need to react differently to what's in your control versus what's out of your control. So, let's take the pandemic because I know it's constantly on everybody's mind, especially mine right now, as my college is going through a bit of a lockdown with it myself. The pandemic in a sense is out of your control. This isn't to say everything is out of your control. It is completely within your control to wear a mask and wash your hands and maintain things that are good for you and protect you. And you'll hear as I'll go through this, I'm talking about a thing called the dichotomy of control, what's in it versus what's out of it, right? You are in control of you during the pandemic, but you are not control of the pandemic itself, right? You don't have control over the pandemic itself. Marcus Aurelius wrote on a lot of things related to this, and of course he wrote about all this in Meditations. I'm going to read what he said about backstabbing, actually, which is something that definitely just carries on to today, and this was written so long ago that, most of us can't even comprehend what it was really like to live as somebody like Marcus Aurelius, who was an emperor and all these crazy things. But again, this is one of those books that I highly recommend you read. It was his personal journal. But the quote is, "Pronounce no more to yourself beyond what the appearances directly declare. It is said to you that someone has spoken ill of you. This alone is told you, and not that you are hurt by it." Basically, what he's saying is, if what you are hearing from the person who backstabbed you is true, if the insult they're saying is true, if they're saying, for example, I don't know, you're fat, right? It's within your control to change how you eat and to be more, consistent with your health and care more about that and do something about it, right? And this is for the majority of people. I understand that there are things that could get in the way of that, being disabled or some other thing, but for the most part it's in somebody's control and they can do it differently than what that person says. But if that person is calling you a liar and you know that you are not a liar, then you shouldn't be hurt by it because you're not a liar and you don't need to worry what this person is saying. So what about this pandemic? Well, I recently picked up The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday. It is, of course, a book about obstacles and how we interact with them. So let's talk about perception in this case. So here is a quote from the book itself, and it says, "There's no good or bad without us. There's only perception. There is the event itself and a story we tell ourselves about what it means." So when you or I are experience something and we experience this thing in our life that changes who we are, or it has an impact on us that we remember it in kind of this vivid, picturesque kind of haze, right? We build a narrative around it and slot it into our brain to fit the narrative that is our life. How are you slotting those events in exactly is really what we're talking about here in terms of perception. If something happens to you that is outside of your control, and you slot it into your brain in a way that will harm you in the long term, then in a way you're doing yourself a disservice. Now, for example, I got COVID. If I wanted to, I could label myself a victim and that the world was out to get me. And certainly in the year 2020, especially for me personally, I know I could easily allow myself to wallow in the ways that the virus ruined me. I could perceive the event as that. How I perceive the event and myself in turn to the event is how, it's going to impact me in the long run. If I perceive myself as a victim, if I perceive myself as a failure because the virus helped to fail me and it was out of my control, right? Then it would impact me in the long run and how I perceive myself and my self-worth and a number of other things. Of course, thinking yourself to be, at the ass end of everything is not a very good way to maintain a positive outlook on life. And I didn't do that, though. At first I did, and it's very easy to because I spent months absolutely sick, and now I have to pull myself out of this hole where I've gained about 30 pounds and I've lost pretty much all of my health, and I'm really starting from ground zero. But I take this event now and I look at it as this virus in a way has allowed me to play a role in history, that decades from now I can tell my grandchildren and hopefully teach others in the world over to be more educated for things like this in the future, to not ignore the past but heed the warnings from it in order to create a better future. Perception, though, is not ignoring the reality of a bad situation. That's not what is happening here. In a sort of reductive way, by looking at it differently or not letting it bother you at all, you're putting some of that control back into your hands instead of letting your emotions rule how this event decides who you will be. The question you have to ask yourself is, am I willing to let my emotions tell me who I am, or am I going to tell my emotions who I am? That's the question you got to be asking yourself in these events that are out of your control. That, horrible accident, that loss of job. Is it something that was in your control or out of? What is the way that you are going to take this and slot it into the narrative of your brain? How are you going to perceive this event? What are you going to do with the troubles that come into your life? Now, the next concept I want to speak of is actually of speaking little and speaking well. And it's something that's been attributed to Epictetus and many other famous figures throughout history. This is why my videos tend to run a bit longer and are usually, if always, written out. I try to hold true to this mantra in a day and age where we need to speak all the time. But here is how Epictetus put it himself. Quote, "Be silent for the most part, or, if you speak, say only what is necessary and in a few words. Talk, but rarely. If occasion calls you, but do not talk of ordinary things, of gladiators or horse races, or athletes, or of meats or drinks. These are topics that arise everywhere. But above all, do not talk about men in blame, or compliment or comparison. If you can, turn the conversation of your company by your talk to some fitting subject. But if you should chance to be isolated among strangers, be silent." And I really like this, right? Because now in today's day and age, we are not only connected 24/7, but we speak more now than ever. Social media makes it easy to give an opinion in an instant. But I'm sure you've all seen it, and especially in this election season, how many people speak but say very little. Is it worth engaging yourself in that conversation? Do you want to be a part of that noise? Is what any of these people are saying even educated? Are you educated in the subject to give an opinion? Most people would say, no, I don't want to engage myself with that, but then do it anyway, pretty much on a regular basis. I see it all the time where people want to talk about being very engaged in politics, but then knowing nothing of policy. I forget where I had read it, and if I remember, I'll mention it. But if you concern yourself with everything, you won't become a master in any one subject. This isn't to avoid discourse. The Stoics were all very involved in politics, most philosophers are. But how much of the political conversation is useful versus useless? Do you know the positions of the people who are running? How will their presidency affect taxes, affect global relations? What are their policies overall? Where can I find these policies? Do I know their history? Do I really know their history? Have I read up on these things? People give opinions all the time, but how do you know it's educated? How do you know what opinions you give are educated? Are they from reading? Are they from learning the policies? Or are they from other comment sections, right? And the comment section, for example, is always, if almost, filled with half-baked opinions that apparently have figured it out and reduced it to a very simple narrative. Did you figure it out, or did you just come to that conclusion in a moment based off of zero evidence? It's moments like this which make us look stupid, worsen discourse, and add to the noise of today that, if anything, we need better discourse, more smartness, and less noise, especially less noise. You can only spend 30 minutes on about political Twitter and realize how much noise there truly, truly is. Ask yourself, what do I want to be knowledgeable in to give an opinion? What do I want to say to the world? Ask yourself, is what I'm going to say worth giving at all, or is it just noise? Am I just adding more useless garbage to the internet, right? Or am I concerning myself with the horse races of today, of information that is not truly of value to me, or things that will make a difference in the long term? How am I going to relate this to something I care about or be knowledgeable in? Those are things you got to ask yourself, and they're things that I ask myself when I make videos all the time. It's why I try not to cover drama, but find myself in a very difficult position of trying to balance my personal philosophy versus my need to pay bills, and it's very difficult, right? But these are kind of those things that you strive for. For example, Marcus Aurelius struggled with his own personal values all the time. But again, I recommend you just go read Meditations, because it's a good book, and I know it sounds crazy because it's an old book and a lot of the wording can be very difficult, especially in today's day and age, but I assure you, if you read it, maybe get one that has like footnotes that kind of translate some of the more esoteric terms, you're going to find that that man was much like the people of today. And yes, I understand he was a world leader, he was an emperor, but he is a lot like you and I, and it really does kind of widen your perspective on things. Now, not every one of these episodes will be on Stoic teachings, but I figured this is some practical knowledge to take with you into your week. I don't know, maybe it'll help you focus on work or find out what is worth focusing on to begin with. Maybe it'll change your feelings on the current times, despite how bleak they could seem. Now, in the meantime, you can find me on social media everywhere at FPS Diesel, as well as episodes on Explain It Slowly's YouTube channel, which by now should be out, and you should subscribe, as it'll just give you an easier way to keep track of when episodes come out, which should be every Monday from now on. But the more people subscribe to the channel, the easier it'll be to get more guests on, more people who are knowledgeable in certain subjects, and I want to be able to give knowledge to you guys and just really make better discourse, right? So take care, everyone. Take this into the week with you, and happy Monday. Cheers, everyone.